Hey, this is Latmun. Welcome to my small and humble home studio where I write all my music. And for those of you that are interested, I don't have any hardware, I do everything in the box. I just have really nice monitors and I've treated it quite nicely so I can make really accurate mixes. That's pretty much, this is my whole home studio. So I spoke to Beatport and they asked if I'd like to go through how I made my track Footsteps as a Beatport tutorial video. I was really happy to do this because I've learned a lot from these kind of videos in the past, little workflow techniques and tips I've picked up, so hopefully I can do one and share some knowledge with you guys. So the first thing I want to go through is a basic workflow thing, but something that is really critical to the way I make music. It helps me a lot, and that is rewiring Ableton with Logic. So Logic X is my choice DAW, but there's one thing that's really frustrating about it, which is that unless you're using only Apple loops, you can't audition audio in time with what's playing in the software, which makes it really slow to try out sounds. It means you have to actually import some sounds into the project and match them to the tempo before you can actually hear what they sound like. So the way you actually rewire them together is to have a send and return in Logic. So I'll show you how they work. You would set up a new send and return, and then say I was going to do it on this one, which is currently a bus. I'll click on it and go to Ableton Live, rewire mix left and right, and then it will come through like this one here, which is currently sending from Ableton right now. And how that works is, if I just quickly play this, so it means you can basically play things in time and just play the sounds in time with what's playing in the software. So I can do it with and it means you can really quickly try things out. It makes it really inspiring for me as well, because I'll hear, like, say I'll play a loop and I hear a little bit from a loop that I like, I'll take just that one bit out, whereas to have heard that sound and see how it'd be in the mix without doing it by the rewire, unless I was using an Apple loop, I would have to import it into the software, time stretch it, and it's just fiddly, and to try out 10 sounds would take like a couple of minutes rather than a couple of seconds through the rewire. So that's something that someone showed me early on as a workflow thing, which really helped a lot with my production. It means I can get ideas down faster and remain inspired while making a track. So to get into actually making the track, I always start with my drums. The reason for doing that is because, well, I also start with my kick of my drums as well. And it's because once you've made the drums, then I go with the bass, and writing a bass line to match the groove of your drums results in a much better final piece from my experience than writing a bass line and trying to match the groove of the drums to it, because it's much harder to do it that way around. So I'll show you how I made up my drums. So I start with the kick, as I mentioned. The kick doesn't really have much processing, just the gain utility in Logic, which I'm using just to make it mono. And then I added a bit of a top to the kick that had a bit more click, so it sits, so you can hear it more in the mix. And again, I just made it mono and EQ'd the bottom end out, and a bit of the top I didn't like, so it's adding the click the harmonics I wanted it to add into the mix. Then I added the clap. That's just snare in this case. So I did something to this which I do in quite a lot of my tracks, which technically speaking is probably quite frowned upon, but I limited my clap within the mix. I like to do that because I like my clap and snare quite loud, and this stops it limiting the whole mix and causing the whole thing to clip, or reducing the volume you can ultimately push and master. I also quite like the kind of extra harmonics it adds by limiting it and distorting a little bit. Not audibly so, but just adds a bit of warmth to it. And then added a tiny bit of reverb as well. So then next I added my hi-hats. I like to layer lots of hi-hats in my mix because it adds a richness to the sound and kind of makes a more complex texture than what you could make with just one sound. So these are my hi-hats built up. And each one adds a bit of like different transient to really kind of make it power through the mix. So I then added a groove to the hi-hat, which is this. of builds up the fundamental groove to the hi-hats in the track. Then I also added a few other weird percussion sounds, so I did this one. And a clave as well. And then the next thing I did was, when I get to this point, I added a couple of loops in. They don't change the groove or anything that I've made, it just helps to set off the track a bit more, adds a bit of air into the highs and kind of rounds off the harmonics in the whole mix. And it's, yeah, sets the track off a little bit more, to be honest. So I'll add them in, but as you can hear, that one's really subtle, you can't really hear it. That adds a bit of a shuffle to the groove. And that's the whole of my drummers. So as I mentioned, I then went on to make my bass, as that's the next thing that sets the foundations for the track. So it's one of the simplest bass lines I wrote. Going down the scale. I made the notes overlap a little bit. That's to create the portamento effect, where the pitch kind of slides between the notes rather than stopping and changing. I could have done that in the synth, but I just did it as I was writing it, so I was explaining why they were overlapping. Then my actual bass line is made in sub-boom bass. I tend to use this a lot when I make my bass lines. It's the one that, I find it gives a really rich sound straight out of the box. It's really easy to tweak the parameters. It also has loads of good presets you can base your initial sounds off. So going back to the fact that getting ideas down quickly keeps you inspired throughout, because you don't get bored. So yeah, I use sub-boom bass for the bass line. And I processed it with Waves R bass, which just adds more harmonics and makes the bass a bit heavier really. You can choose which frequencies to add the harmonics at. It has a bit more sub in, a bit more mid bass, and makes it sit more powerful and makes it sound better in the club. I then sidechained it to the kick, which I've got sending to bus 10. And EQ'd some of the top end out of it, so it wasn't necessary in the mix, it just add muddiness. I then used the gain plugin again to make the bass mono, which want everything bass, the kick and the bass both in mono in the mix. So then I started to build up the track from there, and this is the first little breakdown. So it introduces this sound here, which is this little rising, it's a riser sound actually, which I've added some effects to. So on its own it sounds like this, and I've changed the pitch to match the key of my track, added an echo to make it have more interesting texture in the mix and dynamics. And I've widened it with the PSP stereo widener. So I tend to use a couple of different wideners in my tracks because each one has a bit of a different sound. I use the PSP one, and I use the Waves doubler, and which I'll go through a little bit later. And I also use occasionally the actual built-in one called Imager with the Logic. But this one is the PSP one, so I've just increased the width. It's a really simple plugin for this. Then I EQ'd out the bottom end and a little bit of the highs where it was a bit harsh, around 5k hertz. And that's that. It rolls back into the groove. Yeah, this track's constantly rolling, so it builds up throughout, introduces a bit more of the vocal each time or a new element, and then ultimately builds up mainly based on the vocal with it repeating, and then empties back into the groove again. So I wanted to make a track, yeah, it was more, the philosophy behind the track is that it was more rolling and not as much of an in-your-face bang with some of my other tracks. That's the main reason I wanted to make the track and base it around a vocal, which I hadn't really done before. So I had the vocal on the hard drive already, and then started to build the track around that. So going by that, the next breakdown. So I introduced these chords which add a euphoric element to the track, which and kind of make the whole feel of the track feel more rounded with the melodic element too. So they're made in Blade, which is a great synthesizer. And then I was talking about the other widening plugins, so I added the Waves double up to this. You can actually control the width of the sound here and the middle of the sound here. So you can make sure it's always got something in the middle to sound great in mono as well, in a club or whatever. Then it introduces this tom sound here. just adds some tension to the build-up before the groove comes back in. It's also got a bit of noise just to kind of add tension again and fill out the break a little bit, which rises in volume throughout. And then it's got this weird kind of synthesized percussion sound with a synth called Zebra. And it's got another kind of weird synthesized vocal sound with another synth called Zebra. The same synth called Zebra even. Which again is widened, a bit of reverb. Goes back into the groove again. We've got a chopped up breaks loop here, which kind of rolls it into the drum. One thing to comment on there is when you're chopping up audio like this, so you want to make sure up here you've got the fade in and fade out parameters, and what that does is adds a little micro fade to the sound, which you can see here. And it's just a quick way of doing it rather than volume automation. And if you didn't do that, when you're chopping up audio, you get strange artifacts and clicks and pops at the start of it. So just smooths it out and make sure your whole track sounds nice. So yeah, make sure you remember to do that when you're chopping up audio. It rolls into the next breakdown, where it first introduces the vocal. First introduces the love into the vocal. So this is a good time to say the vocal was obviously originally by Yazoo, called Don't Go, and I had to re-sung for copyright reasons, but also because having it re-sung meant that I could get a nice cleaner vocal sung in a bit of a more unique way than the original track. And it meant I could make it fit in the mix better, process it a bit more. So that was, yeah, Amy Douglas did a great job of that. So with the vocal, it's a pretty basic process as well. So it's compressed to keep the volume even throughout the vocal, so it sits well in the mix. I limited a little bit to do the same thing. Just EQ'd it to get rid of any slightly harsh, or a boost in this case to add a bit more high end into it, and took the bottom end out so that there's no unnecessary artifacts in the mix. And in some of the vocal, I did actually the second break. I'll go for that in a minute. But yeah, so that's pretty much it for the breakdown. The vocal comes in, got a few more sounds, building it up, a riser. Tom comes back in and rolls back into the drop again. So in the main breakdown, we'll go into that now. It's got a ride that comes in, just add a bit more tension here. These laser bleep sounds, which are for Prophet emulator. The vocal just loops basically and builds up to create a crescendo. I've also got the kicks, making a bit of more intensity. I really want to make a snare on this, so I did it with the kicks instead, just to make it a bit more subtle. I've also got this sound, which just follows, it's an arpeggiator just following the sound of the bass line, just to basically add a bit of euphoria to the breakdown and the melodic element to it. Goes back into drop again. And that's pretty much the basis of the track, to be honest. It's a really simple track, as I said, and more focused about good elements that fit together than lots of crazy sounds and loads of layers. So that pretty much covers everything of how I made it. So hopefully you found it useful, picked up a few tips that you can take to the studio. Good luck in your production journey, and I will see you somewhere soon.